Chen, who had been in his office reviewing charts, came running out to see what was happening and immediately called for additional security and police backup. Kevin, seeing the fleeing patients and panicked staff, became even more agitated. In his confused mental state, their fear confirmed his paranoid beliefs that they were all part of a conspiracy against him. He began moving through the emergency room like a force of nature, overturning equipment and furniture, his massive size allowing him to cause tremendous damage with minimal effort. "They're all trying to get away," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "They know I found them. They know I figured it out." Dr. Foster, the resident, tried to approach Kevin from the side, hoping to inject him with a sedative. She had managed to drop a syringe of haloperidol, a powerful antipsychotic medication that might calm him down. But Kevin's peripheral vision caught her movement, and he spun around with frightening speed. "Another one," he bellowed, swinging his massive arm in her direction. "Doctor." Foster barely managed to duck in time, the force of his swing creating a gust of air that she could feel as his hand passed inches from her head. The syringe went flying, shattering against the wall and spilling its contents uselessly on the floor. Marcus Thompson, the large male nurse who specialized in pediatric care, tried a different approach. At 6 feet tall and 220 pounds, Marcus was bigger than most of the other staff members, though still dwarfed by Kevin's enormous frame. He attempted to use his size and calm demeanor to de-escalate the situation. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said in the gentle voice he usually reserved for frightened children. "My name is Marcus. I can see you're scared and upset. We're not here to hurt you. We just want to help." For a brief moment, Kevin seemed to hear him. His wild movements slowed, and he turned to face Marcus with something that might have been confusion rather than pure rage. Marcus took this as a positive sign and continued speaking in his calm, reassuring voice. "Can you tell me your name?" Marcus asked, taking a small step closer. "Can you tell me what's been happening to you?" But the moment of connection was shattered when Tony Rodriguez, the younger security guard, made the mistake of trying to approach Kevin from behind while he was focused on Marcus. Kevin's paranoid instincts kicked in immediately and he spun around to face this new perceived threat. "Trap!" he screamed. "It's a trap, they're surrounding me." What happened next would be burned into the memory of everyone present. Kevin grabbed Tony by the uniform shirt and hurled him across the room with such force that the young man crashed into the nurse's station, sending computers, charts, and medical supplies flying in all directions. Tony hit the floor hard, clutching his shoulder and clearly in significant pain. Marcus, realizing that his attempt at communication had failed, tried to position himself between Kevin and the patients who were still trapped in the emergency room, but Kevin's size and reach advantage made this nearly impossible. The giant man could cover ground with surprising speed, and his long arms meant he could reach almost anywhere in the room without having to move very far. Dr. Chen, who had been coordinating with hospital administration and calling for additional help, realized that the situation was spiraling completely out of control. Police and additional security were on their way, but it would take at least 10 to 15 minutes for them to arrive. In a crisis like this, 10 minutes might as well be 10 hours. Linda Vasquez, the experienced trauma nurse, had been trying to move patients to safety, but Kevin's unpredictable movements made this extremely dangerous. Every time she tried to escort someone toward an exit, Kevin would notice the movement and become more agitated, forcing everyone to freeze in place or risk triggering another violent outburst. The giant man was now in the center of the emergency room treatment area, surrounded by overturned equipment and scattered medical supplies. His breathing was becoming more labored, and Sarah noticed that he was beginning to show signs of exhaustion. But rather than calming him down, fatigue seemed to be making him more paranoid and unpredictable. "They're trying to tire me out," Kevin shouted to no one in particular. "They think if they make me tired, they can get me. But I'm too smart for them. I'm too strong." It was at this moment that Sarah Martinez made a decision that would change everything. While everyone else was focused on trying to contain Kevin or escape from him, Sarah had been quietly observing his behavior, noting the signs and symptoms he was displaying. Her training in psychiatric nursing, combined with her natural ability to remain calm under pressure, allowed her to see what others were missing. Kevin wasn't just a dangerous madman on a rampage. He was a terrified, confused person experiencing a severe mental health crisis. His violence was being driven by fear and paranoia, not malice. And most importantly, Sarah recognized specific symptoms that suggested he might be responsive to the right kind of intervention, if someone was brave enough to try it. As Kevin continued his rampage, throwing furniture and medical equipment while the rest of the staff tried to stay out of his way, Sarah began to formulate a plan. It was dangerous, possibly foolish, and would require her to get closer to this massive, violent man than anyone else had dared to attempt. But she also realized that if something didn't change soon, people were going to get seriously hurt or killed. The rookie nurse, who had been on the job for only 3 weeks, was about to attempt something that would either save the day or get her crushed by a 7-foot giant who was completely lost in his own terrifying reality. Sarah took a deep breath, checked to make sure her plan could work, and prepared to put her life on the line to protect her patients and colleagues. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and the sound of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance. But inside the emergency room of St. Mary's Hospital, time was running out, and one small nurse was about to discover whether courage and compassion could triumph over size and fury. Sarah Martinez stood frozen for only a few seconds, but her mind was racing at lightning speed. While chaos erupted around her and her colleagues scrambled for safety, she was analyzing every detail of Kevin's behavior through the lens of her psychiatric nursing training. What she saw gave her both hope and terror in equal measure. Kevin's movements, while violent and unpredictable, followed certain patterns. He responded aggressively to sudden movements, loud noises, and attempts to approach him from behind. But she had noticed something crucial during Marcus's brief attempt at communication. Kevin had actually stopped and listened, at least for a moment. This suggested that despite his psychotic state, some part of his mind was still accessible. More importantly, Sarah had observed specific symptoms that indicated Kevin might be experiencing what psychiatrists call command hallucinations, voices in his head telling him what to do. The way he periodically paused and seemed to be listening to something no one else could hear, combined with his sudden shifts in focus and behavior, suggested that his actions weren't entirely random. She was right about this diagnosis. There might be a way to reach him. But first, she needed to get closer to him, and that meant putting herself in immediate danger from a man who had already seriously injured 2 security guards and could easily kill her with his bare hands. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone around her could hear it, but her hands were steady as she began to execute her plan. The first step was to get Kevin's attention without triggering his paranoid aggression. Sarah had noticed that he seemed to respond more positively to female voices than male ones, probably because his paranoid delusions were focused on men he perceived as threats. She also realized that her small stature might actually work in her favor, making her appear less threatening than the larger staff members who had already tried to intervene. Sarah slowly moved away from the nurse's station, positioning herself where Kevin could see her clearly, but not so close that he would feel cornered or threatened. She waited until he was between violent outbursts, during one of those brief moments when he seemed to be listening to the voices in his head. "Kevin," she said in a clear, calm voice that somehow carried across the chaotic emergency room. "Kevin Morrison." The giant man froze mid-motion, a medical cart halfway overturned in his massive hands. His wild eyes searched the room until they fixed on Sarah, and for a moment, the entire ER fell silent, except for the sound of his heavy breathing. Even the patients stopped whimpering, sensing that something crucial was happening. "How do you know my name?" Kevin asked, his voice suspicious but less aggressive than it had been. The fact that he was asking a question rather than simply attacking was progress, and Sarah felt a tiny spark of hope. "My name is Sarah," she replied, keeping her voice steady and non-threatening. "I'm a nurse here, and I can see that you're in a lot of pain right now. Physical pain and emotional pain. I want to help you, Kevin." Dr. Chen, who was watching this interaction with mounting concern, started to move towards Sarah, probably intending to pull her back to safety. But Sarah caught his eye and gave him a subtle but firm gesture to stay back. She couldn't afford to have anyone interrupt this delicate process now that she had Kevin's attention. "You don't understand," Kevin said, his voice carrying a note of desperation. "They've been following me for weeks. They're trying to hurt me. They want to put me away somewhere." Sarah nodded slowly, accepting his reality without challenging it directly. This was a technique she had learned in her psychiatric training. Never try to argue someone out of their delusions during an acute psychotic episode. Instead, acknowledge their feelings and try to redirect their focus. "That sounds really scary, Kevin," she said with genuine empathy. "It must be terrifying to feel like people are trying to hurt you. Can you tell me about these people who are following you?" As Kevin began to describe his paranoid delusions, Sarah listened carefully, not just to his words but to his body language and vocal patterns. She was looking for clues about what might calm him down and what might set him off again. She also needed to figure out how to get close enough to administer medication that could help stabilize his condition. "They're everywhere," Kevin said, his eyes darting around the room as if he could see threats that no one else could perceive. "They watch me when I sleep. They follow me when I try to find food. They want to lock me up and experiment on me. Sarah realized that Kevin was probably homeless and had been living with untreated mental illness for some time. His paranoid delusions had likely been reinforced by the very real dangers and harassment that homeless people often face, making his condition even more complex and difficult to treat. "Kevin, I believe that you're scared and that bad things have happened to you," Sarah said, taking a very small step closer. "But right now, you're in a hospital. This is a safe place where we help people who are hurt or sick. No one here wants to hurt you." Kevin's eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made Sarah's skin crawl. But she forced herself to maintain eye contact. She could see intelligence in those wild eyes, along with pain and confusion. This wasn't just a violent criminal. This was a human being who was suffering from a serious medical condition. "How do I know you're not one of them?" Kevin asked, his voice becoming more agitated again. "How do I know this isn't part of the trap?" This was the crucial moment. Sarah knew that her next words could either de-escalate the situation or trigger another violent outburst that could result in serious injury or death. She took a deep breath and decided to take a calculated risk. "Because I'm going to prove it to you, Kevin," she said, slowly reaching into her pocket. "I'm going to show you that I'm here to help, not hurt." Kevin's body tensed as he saw her hand move, and several staff members gasped in fear, thinking she was about to become his next victim. But Sarah's hand emerged holding not a weapon or syringe, but her hospital ID badge. "Look at this, Kevin," she said, holding the badge where he could see it clearly. "My name is Sarah Martinez. I'm 25 years old. I've been a nurse for 3 weeks. I went to nursing school because I want to help people who are hurting, just like you're hurting right now." Kevin stared at the badge for a long moment, and Sarah could almost see him processing this information through the fog of his psychotic state. His paranoid delusions had convinced him that everyone in the hospital was part of some conspiracy against him, but Sarah's willingness to identify herself and share personal information seemed to contradict that narrative. "You're really a nurse?" he asked, and for the first time his voice sounded more confused than angry. "Yes, I really am," Sarah confirmed. "And part of being a nurse means that I took an oath to help people who are sick or hurt, no matter what. That includes you, Kevin." While she was talking, Sarah was also carefully observing Kevin's physical condition. Despite his massive size and apparent strength, she could see signs of exhaustion, dehydration, and possibly malnutrition. The blood on his clothes appeared to be from several untreated wounds, and his erratic behavior suggested he might also be suffering from a head injury or drug interaction. "I can see that you're hurt, Kevin," Sarah said gently. "You have cuts on your arms and face that need to be cleaned and bandaged. When was the last time you had something to eat or drink?" Kevin looked down at his arms as if seeing the injuries for the first time. The combination of his mental illness and possible head trauma had probably made him unaware of his physical condition. This gave Sarah an opening to suggest treatment without making him feel trapped or threatened.
"I don't remember,"
Kevin admitted, his voice becoming quieter. "I've been hiding for I don't know how long." Sarah felt her heart break for this man who was clearly suffering from multiple serious medical conditions. Kevin's psychotic episode could worsen at any moment, and the longer he went without proper medication, the more dangerous he could become. "Kevin, I want to help you with those cuts, and I want to get you something to drink," Sarah said, taking another small step closer. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" This was the moment of truth. Kevin was standing about 10 feet away from her, close enough that he could reach her in 2 steps if he decided she was a threat. She could see his massive hands clenching and unclenching as he struggled with his paranoid thoughts and his growing recognition that he needed help. Chen was positioned behind Kevin, ready to intervene if necessary, but they both knew that if Kevin decided to attack Sarah, there might not be enough time to stop him. The other staff members were holding their breath watching this unprecedented confrontation between a tiny rookie nurse and a giant man in the midst of a psychotic break. "I don't know," Kevin said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know who to trust anymore." Sarah realized that this was actually progress. The fact that Kevin was expressing uncertainty rather than absolute paranoia suggested that her approach was beginning to work. She decided to push a little further, using a technique she had learned for dealing with patients experiencing command hallucinations. "Kevin, are you hearing voices right now?" she asked directly. "Voices telling you what to do or what to think about the people here?" Kevin's eyes widened in surprise. No one had ever asked him about the voices before, and the fact that Sarah seemed to understand what he was experiencing created a small crack in his paranoid worldview. "You can hear them too?" he asked, hope and fear mixed in his voice. "No, I can't hear them," Sarah admitted honestly. "But I know that you can, and I know that they're probably telling you things that are making you scared and angry." Sometimes when people are sick the way you're sick, their brain plays tricks on them. The voices aren't real, Kevin, but your pain is real. And we can help you feel better.
This is dangerous territory. This is dangerous territory.
Challenging a psychotic person's delusions too directly could trigger violent behavior. But Sarah had calculated that Kevin was intelligent enough to consider the possibility that his perceptions might not be accurate, especially if it was presented as a medical explanation rather than a personal attack on his sanity. Kevin stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, his massive frame trembling slightly as he struggled to process what Sarah had told him. The entire emergency room held its breath, waiting to see whether this unprecedented intervention would work or whether they were all about to witness a tragedy. Finally, Kevin spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. If the voices aren't real, then maybe you're not trying to hurt me?
That's right, Kevin, Sarah said, relief flooding through her voice. We're not trying to hurt you.
We want to help you feel better. Will you let me come a little closer so I can look at your cuts? Kevin nodded slowly, and Sarah took the biggest risk of her life. She began walking directly toward a 7-foot giant who had just finished terrorizing an entire emergency room, armed with nothing but her medical knowledge, her compassion, and her courage. As Sarah slowly approached Kevin, every step felt like it took an eternity. The distance between them, only about 8 feet, seemed to stretch endlessly as she maintained eye contact with the massive man who could easily kill her with one swing of his enormous arms. Her training had prepared her for many emergency situations, but nothing could have truly prepared her for this moment of walking directly toward a violent, psychotic patient who towered over her like a giant from a nightmare. Kevin's breathing was heavy and labored, visible clouds of vapor escaping his mouth as he struggled with the conflicting messages his diseased mind was sending him.
On one hand, his paranoid delusions were screaming that Sarah was a threat, part of the conspiracy he believed was targeting him. On the other hand, his desperate need for help and human connection was responding to her calm, caring approach.
That's good, Kevin, Sarah said softly as she took another step closer. You're doing really well. I know this is scary for you. Behind Kevin, Dr. Chen was positioning himself carefully, ready to intervene if the situation turned violent. But he was also aware that any sudden movement could trigger another aggressive episode. Linda Vasquez had quietly prepared a syringe with a powerful sedative, holding it ready but out of sight. Marcus Thompson was slowly moving patients to the furthest corners of the emergency room, trying to get them as far away from Kevin as possible. When Sarah was about 5 feet away from Kevin, she stopped and held up her hands where he could see them clearly.
I'm going to reach into my pocket and get some supplies to clean your cuts, she said, moving with deliberate slowness. I'm not going to hurt you.
I just want to help you feel better. Kevin's eyes followed her every movement as she carefully pulled out a small bottle of saline solution and some gauze pads from her pocket. These were basic supplies that every nurse carried, but in this situation they represented her primary tools for establishing trust and beginning treatment. Can you hold out your arm, Kevin? Sarah asked. I can see you have a deep cut there that needs to be cleaned. Kevin hesitated for a moment, then slowly extended his massive left arm. The cut was indeed deep, probably from broken glass, and it was showing signs of infection. Sarah realized that Kevin had been living rough for several days, possibly weeks, without any medical care. As she gently began cleaning the wound, Sarah continued talking to Kevin in the same calm, reassuring voice she used with all her patients. This might sting a little, but it's going to help prevent infection, she said as she worked. Kevin, can you tell me when you last took medication for the voices? Do you remember taking any pills or shots that help make them quieter? Kevin winced slightly as the saline solution touched his wound, but he didn't pull away. I had pills, he said slowly, as if the memory was difficult to access. Little white pills, but I lost them when they made me leave the place where I was staying. Sarah realized that Kevin had probably been on antipsychotic medication at some point but had lost access to it, possibly when he became homeless. This explained why his condition had deteriorated so dramatically. Without proper medication, people with severe mental illness often experience increasingly severe symptoms that can lead to exactly the kind of crisis they were now facing. Those pills were helping you, weren't they? Sarah asked as she continued to clean his wound. They made the voices quieter and helped you feel less scared? Yes, Kevin said, his voice becoming more coherent as Sarah's gentle care seemed to ground him in reality. But then everything got confused again. The voices came back stronger, and I couldn't think straight. This confirmation of Kevin's medical history gave Sarah the information she needed to formulate a treatment plan. But first, she had to find a way to administer medication without triggering his paranoid fears about being drugged or poisoned.
Kevin, I have medicine here that can help make the voices quieter, just like those white pills used to do, Sarah said as she finished cleaning his first wound and moved to examine a cut on his forehead.
But I want to explain exactly what it is and what it will do before I give it to you. This is the book. It's about history.
Is that okay? Kevin nodded, and Sarah felt a surge of hope. His willingness to listen and cooperate suggested that her approach was working. But she also knew that his mental state could change rapidly, and she needed to act quickly while she had his trust. The medicine is called haloperidol, Sarah explained as she cleaned the cut on his forehead. It's designed to help people whose brains are sending them confusing messages. It won't hurt you, and it won't make you unconscious. It will just help quiet the voices and make it easier for you to think clearly. Dr.
Chen, who had been listening to this explanation, carefully moved to where Sarah could see him and held up a syringe. Sarah gave him a subtle nod, indicating that she was ready to attempt the injection.
But she knew this was the most dangerous moment yet. Many psychotic patients became violent when they saw medical staff approaching with syringes, associating them with being forcibly medicated against their will. Kevin, Dr. Chen is going to give you the medicine now, Sarah said, maintaining eye contact with him while continuing to clean his wounds. It's just a small injection in your arm, like a vaccination. It will help you feel better. Kevin's eyes flicked toward Dr. Chen, and Sarah could see his paranoid thoughts beginning to resurface. His muscles tensed, and his breathing became more rapid. This was the critical moment where everything could go wrong. Kevin, look at me. Sarah said firmly but gently, look right at me. I want you to focus on my voice while Dr. Saltwister.
Chen gives you the medicine. Can you do that for me? Kevin's wild eyes fixed on Sarah's face, and she began talking to him in a continuous, soothing stream of words, designed to keep his attention focused on her rather than on the approaching doctor.
You're doing so well, Kevin. I'm really proud of how brave you're being. I know this is scary, but you're being very strong. The medicine is going to help you feel so much better. You're going to be able to think more clearly, and the voices are going to get quieter. Doctor? Chen moved with the skill and precision of someone who had performed thousands of injections under difficult conditions. He approached Kevin from the side, staying within Sarah's line of sight so Kevin wouldn't feel like he was being surrounded. The injection needed to be administered into a large muscle, typically the shoulder or hip, but Kevin's size and current position meant that Dr. Chen would have to be creative about his approach. Just a little pinch now, Kevin, Sarah continued. Keep looking at me. You're doing perfectly. This is going to help you so much. Dr. Wordpage, books.com. Chen smoothly inserted the needle into Kevin's left shoulder, pushing the plunger slowly to administer the full dose of haloperidol. Kevin flinched at the moment of injection but didn't pull away or become aggressive, his attention still focused on Sarah's face and voice. All done, Dr. Chen said quietly, stepping back to a safe distance. Very good, Kevin. That was very brave. But Sarah knew their work wasn't finished yet. Haloperidol typically takes 15 to 30 minutes to take effect, and during that time, Kevin could still experience episodes of violence or paranoia. She needed to keep him calm and cooperative until the medication began to stabilize his condition. How do you feel, Kevin? Sarah asked as she applied bandages to his cleaned wounds. Any different yet? I don't know, Kevin said honestly. The voices are still there, but they're not as loud as they were before. This was exactly what Sarah had hoped to hear. The fact that Kevin could already perceive some reduction in his auditory hallucinations suggested that he was responding well to the medication and that his condition might be more treatable than they had initially feared. That's perfect, Kevin, Sarah said with genuine enthusiasm. The medicine is starting to work. Over the next few minutes, you should feel even better. Your thinking will become clearer, and those scary voices will keep getting quieter.
As they waited for the medication to take full effect, Sarah continued to provide basic medical care, cleaning and bandaging Kevin's other wounds while keeping him engaged in conversation. She learned that he had been a construction worker before his mental illness became severe, that he had family somewhere but had lost contact with them, and that he had been living on the streets for several months.
I used to be normal, Kevin said sadly as Sarah worked on a particularly bad cut on his hand. I had a job, an apartment, friends, but then everything started falling apart, and I couldn't make sense of anything anymore. You can be normal again, Kevin, Sarah assured him. Mental illness is just like any other medical condition. It can be treated. With the right medication and support, you can get your life back. Gradually, as the haloperidol began to take effect, the change in Kevin was dramatic and unmistakable. His breathing became more regular, his muscles relaxed, and his eyes lost that wild, frightened look that had been so terrifying.
He began to speak more coherently, and his movements became less erratic and threatening. I think I was seeing things that weren't there, Kevin said slowly, as if the realization was just dawning on him. The people following me, they weren't real, were they?
No, Kevin, they weren't real, Sarah confirmed gently.
Your brain was sick, and it was making you see and hear things that weren't actually happening, but now you're getting better. As Kevin's condition stabilized, the rest of the emergency room staff began the process of cleaning up the chaos he had created during his psychotic episode. Jim Patterson and Tony Rodriguez, the injured security guards, were receiving medical attention for their injuries. Fortunately, neither man was seriously hurt, though both would be sore for several days.
The patients who had been trapped during Kevin's rampage were all unharmed, though understandably shaken by the experience.
Mrs. Watson, the elderly woman with chest pains, had been particularly frightened, but she was now stable and receiving appropriate care. The other patients were also being attended to by the medical staff, who were working to restore normal operations to the emergency room. Dr. Chen approached Sarah and Kevin carefully, wanting to assess Kevin's current mental state and determine the next steps in his treatment.
Kevin, how are you feeling now? Dr. Chen asked in his calm, professional voice.
Better, Kevin replied, his voice now much more normal-sounding than it had been during his psychotic episode. Confused about what happened, but better.
Did I hurt anyone? The security guards have some bruises, but they're going to be fine, Dr. Chen assured him.
What's important now is making sure you continue to get better. Sarah stayed close to Kevin as Dr. Chen conducted a brief mental status examination, checking his orientation, memory, and thought processes. It was clear that the medication was working effectively and that Kevin was returning to a more baseline level of functioning.
Kevin, we need to admit you to our psychiatric unit for a few days, Dr. Caffin,
Chen explained. We want to make sure you're stable on medication and help you develop a plan for continuing treatment once you're discharged. Kevin nodded, seeming relieved rather than resistant to the suggestion. I don't want to feel like that again, he said. I was so scared and confused. I thought everyone was trying to hurt me. With proper medication and follow-up care, you shouldn't have to feel like that again, Sarah assured him. There are good treatments available for your condition. As Kevin was prepared for transfer to the psychiatric unit, Sarah reflected on what had just happened.
In the space of less than an hour, she had talked down a violent psychotic patient who could have killed multiple people. She had risked her life to provide medical care to someone who desperately needed it, and her intervention had prevented what could have been a tragic situation.
As Kevin Morrison was wheeled up to the psychiatric unit on a gurney, sedated but conscious and cooperative, the emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital began to return to its normal rhythm. But nothing would ever be quite the same for the staff who had witnessed Sarah Martinez's extraordinary intervention. Word of what had happened spread through the hospital with lightning speed, carried by nursing assistants, maintenance workers, and security personnel who had either witnessed the events firsthand or heard about them from colleagues. Dr. Robert Chen, who had been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years and had seen countless crises, found himself struggling to process what he had just witnessed. A rookie nurse with 3 weeks of experience had successfully de-escalated a situation that could have resulted in multiple fatalities. Her combination of courage, medical knowledge, and pure human compassion had turned a potential disaster into a remarkable success story. Sarah, Dr. Chen said as she finished updating Kevin's chart, I need you to know that what you did tonight was absolutely extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it in my entire career. Sarah looked up from her paperwork, exhaustion finally beginning to show on her face now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I just did what I thought was best for the patient, she replied simply. He needed help, not violence. Janet Morrison, the head nurse, had arrived back at the emergency room just as Kevin was being transferred to the psychiatric unit. When she heard what had happened, she could hardly believe it.
The young nurse she had been mentoring had just accomplished something that veteran psychiatric nurses with decades of experience might never attempt.
Martinez, Janet said, her voice filled with a mixture of pride and concern. You could have been killed.
You realize that, don't you? Yes, I knew that, Sarah admitted, but I also knew that if someone didn't try to reach him, people were going to get seriously hurt. Maybe killed. I couldn't just stand by and watch that happen. The other staff members who had been present during the crisis were equally amazed by Sarah's actions. Marcus Thompson, who had attempted to communicate with Kevin himself before Sarah's intervention, shook his head in wonder. I've been working with difficult patients for 8 years, Marcus said, and I thought I knew how to handle psychiatric emergencies. But what you did tonight was on a completely different level. You saved that man's life and probably saved all of us from a terrible tragedy.
Linda Vasquez, the experienced trauma nurse, was more direct in her assessment.
"Girl, you've got steel in your spine and ice in your veins," she told Sarah. "What you did was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the craziest."
Maybe both. As the immediate crisis passed and the emergency room returned to normal operations, the full scope of what had occurred began to sink in. Security footage would later show that Kevin Morrison, standing nearly 7 feet tall and weighing over 300 pounds, had been capable of causing catastrophic damage during his psychotic episode. He had thrown 2 security guards across the room like they were children, overturned heavy medical equipment, and created an atmosphere of terror that had every person in the ER fearing for their lives. Jim Patterson, the injured security guard, was treated for bruised ribs and a mild concussion but would make a full recovery.
Tony Rodriguez had suffered a dislocated shoulder but was also expected to heal completely. Both men expressed amazement when they heard how Sarah had managed to calm Kevin down and get him to accept treatment.
"I've been in law enforcement for over 30 years, Jim told Sarah later that evening, "and I've seen a lot of dangerous situations. But what that man could have done if you hadn't stopped him.
That doesn't bear thinking about. The patients who had been trapped in the emergency room during Kevin's rampage were all deeply affected by what they had witnessed.
Mrs. Eleanor Watson, the elderly woman with chest pains, sought out Sarah before being discharged the next morning. "Dear, I want you to know that you saved my life tonight," Mrs. Watson said, tears in her eyes. "I've never been so frightened in my 83 years, but watching you walk up to that poor, sick man and treat him with such kindness, it was like watching an angel at work." Maria Santos, the young mother who had been in the ER with her sick baby, was equally moved by Sarah's actions. "I was so scared for my daughter," Maria said, "but you made sure everyone was safe. You put yourself in danger to protect all of us, including my baby. I will never forget that." News of the incident reached hospital administration within hours, and by the next morning, Sarah found herself called into a meeting with Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the chief medical officer, and Robert Adams, the hospital's director of nursing. She expected to be reprimanded for taking such a dangerous risk without authorization. "Ms. Martinez," Dr. Harper began, "what you did last night was unprecedented. You violated several safety protocols by approaching a violent psychiatric patient without backup or proper protective equipment." Sarah's heart sank. She had saved lives and prevented a tragedy, but now she was going to be disciplined for not following proper procedures. But Dr. Harper's next words surprised her completely. However, the chief medical officer continued, "Your actions also prevented what could have been a catastrophic situation. Your quick thinking, courage, and clinical expertise turned a potential disaster into a success story. The hospital administration wants to commend you for your exceptional performance under extreme circumstances." Robert Adams, the director of nursing, added his own perspective. "Sarah, in my 25 years in hospital administration, I've never seen a more perfect example of what nursing is supposed to be about. You saw a patient in crisis, and despite the danger to yourself, you provided exactly the care he needed." It was extraordinary. The formal recognition from hospital administration was just the beginning. Within a week, Sarah's story had spread beyond St. Mary's Hospital to nursing schools, medical conferences, and healthcare publications across the country. She received calls from nursing journals requesting interviews, invitations to speak at conferences, and job offers from prestigious hospitals that had heard about her remarkable intervention. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Kevin Morrison himself, now stable on medication and receiving comprehensive psychiatric care, asked to meet with Sarah during his 3rd day in the hospital. "I remember what you did for me," Kevin told her during their brief meeting. "I was completely lost in my own mind, terrified and confused, and you were the only person who treated me like a human being instead of a monster. You saved my life." Kevin's recovery was remarkable. With proper medication and psychiatric care, his paranoid delusions disappeared completely, and he was able to think clearly for the first time in months. Social workers helped him connect with family members who had been searching for him, and arrangements were made for him to receive ongoing treatment and housing assistance after his discharge. "I had a college degree and a good job before my illness became severe," Kevin explained to Sarah during one of their conversations. "Mental illness doesn't discriminate. 7. It can happen to anyone. But with proper treatment and people who care enough to help, recovery is possible." Sarah's approach to Kevin's crisis became a case study in nursing schools and medical training programs across the country. Her combination of psychiatric knowledge, de-escalation techniques, and sheer courage was analyzed and taught as an example of how healthcare professionals should respond to psychiatric emergencies. Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychiatrist who specialized in emergency mental health interventions, wrote about Sarah's case in the American Journal of Emergency Medicine. Nurse Martinez's intervention demonstrates the critical importance of treating psychiatric patients with dignity and respect even during acute psychotic episodes. Dr. Williams wrote,
Her ability to see past the patient's frightening behavior to the suffering human being underneath is exactly what we should be teaching all healthcare professionals. The story also had an impact on hospital security protocols and staff training programs. Many hospitals began implementing new procedures for dealing with psychiatric emergencies, emphasizing de-escalation and patient-centered care over purely defensive measures.
Sarah herself remained remarkably humble about the attention her actions received. She continued working in the emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital, where she quickly gained a reputation as one of the most skilled and compassionate nurses on the staff. Patients specifically requested her care, and medical students and new nurses sought her out for mentoring. "I don't think what I did was heroic," Sarah often said when asked about that night. "I just saw a patient who needed help and tried to provide the best care I could." That's what any good nurse would have done. But Janet Morrison, her supervisor, knew better. "Sarah, what you did that night wasn't just good nursing," Janet told her months later. "It was exceptional nursing. You risked your life to save a patient who everyone else saw as dangerous. You looked past his illness to see his humanity. That's not something that can be taught in school. That comes from who you are as a person."
1 year later, Sarah received the Nightingale Award for Excellence in Nursing, the most prestigious recognition in her profession. The award citation read, "For extraordinary courage, clinical expertise, and compassion in the face of extreme danger, demonstrating the highest ideals of the nursing profession." At the award ceremony, Sarah was asked to speak about her experience and what it had taught her about nursing and patient care.
"That night taught me that sometimes the patients who seem the most frightening and difficult are actually the ones who need our help the most," Sarah said. Kevin Morrison wasn't a monster or a criminal. He was a sick man who was suffering terribly and needed medical care. Our job as healthcare professionals is to see past the illness to the person underneath and provide the best care we can, regardless of the circumstances. Kevin Morrison, who had continued his recovery and was now living independently with ongoing psychiatric support, attended the awards ceremony. Sarah Martinez never imagined that her third week as a rookie nurse would involve taking down a man twice her size who was terrorizing an entire emergency room. At 5'3" inches and barely 120 pounds, she looked like the least likely person to stop a rampaging giant. But sometimes, the most unexpected heroes emerge when chaos strikes. It was 2:47 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday when the automatic doors of St. Mary's Hospital emergency room burst open with such force that they nearly shattered. What walked through those doors wasn't just another patient, it was a nightmare that would test every person in that building. A towering figure, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with wild eyes and blood-stained clothes, began his rampage through the ER with terrifying violence. Security guards fled. Experienced doctors ducked for cover. Veteran nurses scrambled to protect patients. But one person stood her ground when everyone else ran. A rookie nurse, who had only been on the job for 3 weeks. What happened next would become legend in hospital corridors across the country. This is the true story of how Sarah Martinez, armed with nothing but quick thinking, medical knowledge, and unshakable courage, took down a dangerous man who had an entire emergency room in chaos. Her actions that night saved lives, prevented tragedy, and proved that heroes don't always come in the size and shape we expect. But to understand how this small-town nurse became an overnight hero, we need to go back to where it all began, to a quiet evening shift that was about to turn into the most terrifying night of her career. Sarah Martinez checked her watch for the third time in 10 minutes. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital was unusually quiet for a Tuesday night, with only a handful of patients scattered across the waiting area. She had been working as a registered nurse for exactly 21 days, and this was the first time she experienced what the veteran staff called the calm. It made her nervous. At 25 years old, Sarah had dreamed of being a nurse since she was 12. When her younger brother Miguel was hospitalized after a severe asthma attack,
She watched the nurses care for him with such skill and compassion that she knew immediately what she wanted to do with her life. After 4 years of nursing school and countless hours of studying, she had finally landed her dream job at one of the city's busiest emergency rooms.
the ER at St. Mary's was known throughout the state as a trauma center that handled the most critical cases. Located in downtown Detroit, it served a population that ranged from wealthy business executives to homeless individuals struggling with addiction and mental illness. Sarah had trained for this environment, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of working in such an intense setting.
Her supervisor, Janet Morrison, had been a nurse for 30 years and had seen everything the emergency room could throw at her. Janet was a stern but caring woman in her 50s, who took new nurses under her wing with a mixture of tough love and genuine concern for their development.
She had been watching Sarah closely during her first 3 weeks, impressed by the young woman's dedication and natural instincts. "Martinez, you're doing great for a rookie," Janet had told her earlier that evening.
"But remember, in this job, you never know what's coming through those doors. Stay alert, trust your training, and never let your guard down completely, even on quiet nights like this."
This is the book, it's about history.
Sarah had nodded, appreciating the advice but not fully understanding what Janet meant.
The emergency room was staffed with a skeleton crew for the overnight shift. Besides Sarah and Janet, there were 2 other nurses on duty: Marcus Thompson, a gentle giant of a man who specialized in pediatric care, and Linda Vasquez, a no-nonsense nurse with 15 years of experience in trauma care. Dr. Robert Chen was the attending physician, known for his quick thinking and calm demeanor under pressure. Dr.
Amanda Foster, a resident in her 2nd year, was also on duty, eager to gain more experience in emergency medicine. The security team consisted of 2 guards. Jim Patterson, a retired police officer in his 60s who had been working hospital security for 8 years, and Tony Rodriguez, a younger man in his 30s who was studying to become a police officer himself.
Both men were trained to handle difficult situations, but hospital security was generally about de-escalation rather than physical confrontation. As the clock approached 2:30 a.m., the ER had only 5 patients.
Mrs. Eleanor Watson, an elderly woman with chest pains who was waiting for test results. James Cooper, a construction worker who had injured his hand on a job site. Maria Santos, a young mother whose baby had a fever that wouldn't break. David Kim, a college student who had fallen off his bike and possibly broken his wrist. And Robert Bob Turner, a homeless man who was a frequent visitor to the ER, usually suffering from complications related to his alcoholism and diabetes.
Sarah was making her rounds, checking on each patient and updating their charts. She had always been naturally empathetic, able to connect with patients and make them feel comfortable even during frightening medical situations.
Mrs. Watson in particular had taken a liking to her, commenting on how Sarah reminded her of her own granddaughter.
"You have such gentle hands, dear," Mrs. Watson had said as Sarah checked her blood pressure. "And you really listen when people talk. That's becoming rare these days."
The compliment warmed Sarah's heart. This was exactly why she had become a nurse. To make a difference in people's lives during their most vulnerable moments.
She had chosen emergency nursing specifically because she wanted to be on the front lines, helping people when they needed it most. Dr. Chen was reviewing test results in his office, while Dr. Foster was catching up on paperwork.
The overnight shift often provided opportunities for the medical staff to handle administrative tasks and prepare for the busy day shift that would begin in a few hours. Everyone was relaxed, professional, and focused on providing quality care to their small group of patients.
Marcus was in the break room heating up leftover pizza from dinner. He was known for his ability to find humor in even the most stressful situations, often lightening the mood with his quick wit and genuine warmth.
His colleagues appreciated his positive attitude, especially during the long overnight hours when fatigue could make everyone irritable. Linda was updating patient files at the nurse's station, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she concentrated on her work. She prided herself on maintaining detailed and accurate records, understanding that proper documentation could be crucial for patient care and legal protection. Her attention to detail had saved the hospital from several potential lawsuits over the years. The hospital itself was a sprawling complex that had been built in the 1960s and expanded several times over the decades. The emergency room was located on the ground floor, with large windows facing the main street and automatic sliding doors that provided easy access for ambulances and walk-in patients.
The waiting area could accommodate about 40 people, with comfortable chairs arranged in small groupings, and a television mounted on the wall that usually played news or light entertainment programming. Behind the waiting area was the main treatment floor, divided into individual rooms and cubicles, separated by curtains. Each space was equipped with the latest medical technology and supplied with everything the staff might need for emergency treatment.
The nurse's station was centrally located, providing clear sightlines to most of the treatment areas and easy access to patient files and communication systems. Sarah had spent considerable time during her first few weeks learning the layout of the hospital and the locations of all emergency equipment.
She knew where every supply closet was located, how to quickly access crash carts and defibrillators, and the fastest routes to various departments throughout the hospital. This knowledge would prove crucial in the hours ahead. The city outside was quiet, with only the occasional sound of traffic or a distant siren breaking the silence. Rain had been falling steadily for several hours, creating a peaceful atmosphere that seemed to encourage the unusual calm in the emergency room. Street lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating patterns of light that danced across the hospital's windows. Sarah was completing her documentation when she noticed Bob Turner shifting uncomfortably in his bed. She approached him with a warm smile, checking to see if he needed anything. Bob was well known to the staff, a gentle man in his 50s who had been living on the streets for several years after losing his job and family to his struggles with alcoholism. Despite his circumstances, he was always polite and grateful for the care he received. "How are you feeling, Mr. Geno?" "Turner?" Sarah asked, checking his IV line and monitoring equipment. "Better, thanks to you folks," Bob replied with a weak smile. "Sorry for being a bother again." "You're never a bother," Sarah assured him. "We're here to help, and that's exactly what we're going to do." During the reception afterward, he approached Sarah with a small gift, a photo of himself with his family, whom he had reconnected with thanks to the treatment he received after his crisis. "You gave me my life back," Kevin told her simply. "I wanted you to see what that life looks like now." The photo showed Kevin at a family barbecue, surrounded by relatives who were smiling and laughing. He looked healthy, happy, and completely different from the terrifying figure who had burst into the emergency room that night. It was a powerful reminder of why Sarah had become a nurse in the first place. Sarah Martinez continued working in emergency nursing for many years after that night, eventually becoming a supervisor herself and training new nurses in the same principles that had guided her actions during Kevin's crisis. She never forgot the lesson that night had taught her, that behind every patient, no matter how frightening or difficult they might seem, is a human being who deserves compassion, respect, and the best care possible. The story of the rookie nurse who took down a 7-foot giant became legend at St. Mary's Hospital and beyond. But for Sarah, it was simply the night she learned what it truly meant to be a nurse, and discovered that courage, compassion, and clinical skill could overcome even the most impossible odds. Years later, when new nurses asked her for advice about handling difficult situations, Sarah would tell them, "Remember that every patient is someone's family member, and they all deserve to be treated with dignity. Sometimes the most challenging patients are the ones who need our help the most. Don't let fear keep you from providing the care they need." It was a lesson that would guide countless healthcare professionals for generations to come, inspired by the memory of one small nurse who faced down a giant with nothing but her courage and her commitment to healing. This was typical of Sarah's approach to patient care. She treated everyone with the same level of respect and compassion, regardless of their background or circumstances. Her colleagues had noticed this quality immediately and knew she would develop into an exceptional nurse. As she finished checking on Bob, Sarah glanced at the clock again. It was 2:45 a.m. In just a few minutes, everything would change. The calm, peaceful atmosphere of the emergency room was about to be shattered by an event that would test everyone's courage, training, and dedication to helping others. The automatic doors that had been opening and closing quietly throughout the evening were about to admit someone who would transform this routine night shift into a nightmare that none of them would ever forget. Sarah was completing her notes, unaware that she was about to face the greatest challenge of her young career and discover reserves of courage and strength she never knew she possessed. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean and reflecting the lights of the hospital. Inside, the staff continued their quiet work, caring for their patients and maintaining the peaceful environment that made healing possible. None of them could have imagined that in just a few moments, their world would explode into chaos, and one young nurse would rise to meet a challenge that would define her career and quite possibly save multiple lives. The stage was set for a confrontation that would become legendary in the halls of St. Mary's Hospital, a story that would be told and retold by medical professionals for years to come. Sarah Martinez was about to discover what it truly meant to be a nurse, and the entire emergency room staff was about to learn that heroes sometimes come in the most unexpected packages. The first sign that something was wrong came at exactly 2:47 a.m. when the automatic doors to the emergency room burst open with such violent force that the sound echoed through the entire waiting area like a gunshot. Everyone in the ER looked up simultaneously, expecting to see paramedics rushing in with the critical patient on a stretcher. Instead, what they saw defied immediate comprehension. Standing in the doorway was a man of extraordinary size, nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they almost filled the entire entrance. His massive frame was covered in what appeared to be blood, though it was impossible to tell if it was his own or someone else's. His clothes were torn and disheveled, his hair wild and unkempt, and his eyes held a look of such raw fury and confusion that it sent chills down the spine of everyone who saw him. But it wasn't just his size that was immediately terrifying, it was the way he moved. Despite his enormous frame, he moved with surprising speed and agility, like a predator stalking prey. His breathing was heavy and labored, visible clouds of vapor escaping his mouth in the cool hospital air. His hands, which were the size of dinner plates, were clenched into fists that looked capable of crushing anything they came into contact with. Sarah, who'd been updating patient charts at the nurse's station, felt her blood freeze in her veins as she watched this massive figure scan the emergency room with wild, unfocused eyes. Her training kicked in immediately, and she quickly assessed the situation. This man was clearly in some kind of medical crisis, whether caused by drugs, mental illness, head injury, or some combination of factors, and he posed an immediate danger to everyone in the emergency room. The giant's name, they would later learn, was Kevin Morrison, no relation to Janet, the head nurse.
Kevin was 34 years old and had been living with untreated paranoid schizophrenia for several years. He'd been experiencing a severe psychotic episode that had been building for days, triggered by a combination of factors including stress from losing his job, stopping his medication due to inability to afford it, and a recent head injury from a construction accident that had gone untreated.
On this particular night, Kevin's grip on reality had completely shattered. He believed that people were following him, trying to hurt him, and that the hospital was part of an elaborate conspiracy against him. In his confused and terrified state, he had decided that he needed to fight back against what he perceived as threats everywhere he looked. The blood on his clothes was indeed his own, from several injuries he had sustained while breaking into an abandoned building where he had been hiding for the past 2 days. As Kevin stood in the doorway, his massive chest heaving with each breath, he began to speak in a voice that rumbled through the emergency room like distant thunder. "They're all here," he muttered, his words barely coherent but carrying an undertone of menace that made everyone's skin crawl.
They're all part of it. They're trying to get me, but I won't let them.
I won't let any of them hurt me anymore. Mrs. Watson, the elderly woman with chest pains, let out a small gasp of fear and instinctively moved closer to her bed's call button. James Cooper, the construction worker, sat up straighter in his chair, his injured hand forgotten as he assessed this new threat. Maria Santos pulled her baby closer to her chest, maternal instincts kicking in as she positioned herself to protect her child. The first person to move was Jim Patterson, the security guard. At 62 years old, Jim had seen plenty of difficult situations during his 8 years of hospital security and his previous 25 years as a police officer. But he had never encountered anything quite like this. Despite his experience, Jim felt his heart rate spike as he approached the massive intruder. "Sir, I need you to calm down," Jim said in his most authoritative voice, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. "You're in a hospital, and we're here to help you. But I need you to stay calm and let us know what's wrong." Kevin's wild eyes fixed on Jim, and for a moment the security guard thought he might be getting through to him. But then Kevin's expression twisted into something even more frightening, a combination of rage and terror that suggested he saw Jim not as help, but as another threat. "You're one of them," Kevin roared, his voice so loud it seemed to shake the windows. "You're all part of it. You've been watching me, following me, trying to hurt me." Without warning, Kevin lunged forward with surprising speed for someone his size. Jim, despite his police training, was caught completely off guard by the sheer power and velocity of the attack. Kevin's massive hand closed around Jim's throat, lifting the security guard off his feet as if he weighed nothing at all. Tony Rodriguez, the younger security guard, immediately called for backup on his radio while moving to help his colleague. But before he could reach them, Kevin had thrown Jim across the waiting room with such force that the older man crashed into a row of chairs, sending them flying in all directions. Jim hit the floor hard and didn't get back up, clearly injured and possibly unconscious. The emergency room erupted into chaos. Patients screamed and tried to flee to safety, but there was nowhere to go. The layout of the ER meant that Kevin was blocking the main exit, trapping everyone inside with him. "Doctor." The ER was attacked by a 7-foot giant. One rookie nurse took him down instantly.